My name is Tim Schatz. As you heard, I oversee the beef research program for the Northern Territory Department of Primary Industries, and today I'm going to be talking about a research project that we did in Indonesia in feedlot, comparing the performance of Brahman steers to that of F1 Senepol Brahman cross steers. So just wanted to step back a bit and give you a bit of background as to why this was the genotype that we were comparing to Brahmans. So this work was part of the Senepol crossbreeding project that we've been doing for a number of years, and the aim was to see whether we could use Senepol bulls for crossbreeding with Brahman herds in the Northern Territory to produce progeny that had better meat quality, and also that perform well under NT conditions and that are suited to both the export market but also the southern domestic markets. So basically it was about increasing the marketing options for Northern Territory producers, or Northern Australian I should say, it's wider than the NT. So we began the project in 2008. We did a bit of a SWOT of the industry, and we saw that we were a bit susceptible there where we only had the one market, which was live export. And we hoped that nothing would ever go wrong with that market, but if something ever did, then we saw that Brahman cattle having to be sent to Southern Australia would be penalised due to these perceptions of poor meat tenderness. So the idea was to find a way to give Northern Australian cattle producers more flexibility in marketing. So to be able to produce cattle that would be in demand either in live export or in Southern Australia. And basically it was about finding ways to produce animals with better meat tenderness, which will give more marketing options. So if there ever was a problem with the live export market, we wanted to find a way that producers could very quickly, so in one generation, start producing animals that would be better accepted if they went to Southern Australia. So basically the way of doing that is to increase your Bos taurus content in the animals, to increase your meat tenderness, and do that as quickly as possible, while still producing animals that cope well with the conditions in the Northern Territory and do it at least as well as Brahmans. So the quickest way to do that is to use Bos taurus genes, and the quickest way to get the most genes in the shortest period of time is to use a pure Bos taurus bull. And this has been done in the past, but often what people have found is that these have been terminal sires in the literal sense of the word, in that they all die. And so the obvious solution for us was to use a tropically adapted Bos taurus breed to still be able to get the pure Bos taurus genes in, but have a bull that wasn't going to die when you put him out with your cows. So we could have used any of the tropically adapted Bos taurus breeds, like the Chuli or the Belmont Bonsmara. We chose the Senepol. One of the big advantages was the polledness. There's documented evidence of very good meat quality, and also that they were a bit more of a popular breed at the time of interest. So for those that don't know about the Senepol, it's a stabilised two-breed composite that was developed in the island of St Croix in the Caribbean in the early 1900s, and then it was selected in that sort of tropical, subtropical environment over that period. It's important, I just want to be really clear about this, that this presentation is not an advertisement for one breed, the Senepol. While the results are from Senepols, it's important to understand that you could probably get quite similar results from some of these other tropically adapted Bos taurus breeds or from composites. So a brief summary of what we've been finding when we've been conducting this crossbreeding project. So we had 4-year groups of steers where the Senepol bulls and Brahman bulls went out with Brahman herds. The calves that were weaned were either half Senepol and half Brahman or straight Brahman. They got weaned together and then went and grazed together for the rest of their lives, and we compared their performance. And so we trucked them up from the Katherine VRD region up to Douglas Daly, where they grazed on improved pasture there. And over 4-year groups of Brahman, 4-year groups of steers, we found that in each year, the crossbred F1 Senepol steers were about 21 kilos heavier at weaning, and then they grew another 12 kilos in the post-weaning year. And as a result, they were about 33 kilos heavier at 18 months of age. Now, with the current high prices, that 33 kilograms is about $100 a head. So we're talking about significant benefits here. The other thing we found is that the F1 Senepols are slightly leaner at the same weight. So we measure the P8 depth, and they're a bit leaner. And I'll talk a bit more about that later when we get into the feedlot results, but it's an indication of mature size and that you can fatten them to heavier weights before they start laying down fat. Obviously, it's not just about producing steers. You've got all the females you breed again, and so we're studying their performance. So with the 4-year groups of maiden heifers that we've studied so far, again, heavier weaning weights and higher growth following weaning, so that when you get to joining as 2-year-olds, they're about 35 kilos heavier, and the average over the 4-year groups of heifers was 18% higher pregnancy rates from maiden joining. So these studies obviously take a bit longer as you study the females through their breeding lives, and that work's ongoing around Catherine at the moment. We also did some meat quality studies. We wanted to be certain that that there was the theory was actually playing out, that when we did produce these animals that the meat was more tender, and so we transported 25 Brahman and 25 F1 Senepol steers to a feedlot in central Queensland, and they were fed there for 73 days and then slaughtered. We had MSA assessment done at the Dinmore Abattoir, and then samples were collected from the meat and sent to the meat science lab for meat quality testing. What we found there was that the MSA assessment graded on average the F1 Senepol carcasses 2 boning groups higher, and so you're going to have more animals grading MSA and getting the premium, and a lot of that was just due to the way that they score hump height, which is the way that they assess Bos indicus content. The other thing was the shear force testing done in the meat science lab found that the F1 Senepol meat was significantly more tender than the Brahmans. And so this was the finding that we were wondering about. Were these half Senepol animals more tender? And yes, they were. So in summary, this work has showed that there's a number of production advantages for northern producers from crossbreeding, utilising your hybrid vigour with a tropically adapted Bos taurus. But despite these production advantages, there's a lot of producers in the Northern Territory and in Northern Australia that are reluctant to embrace crossbreeding because they fear that there are price penalties associated with crossbred cattle when the export buyers come to buy cattle. That in the past, that's been one of the things that they've been knocked down on price for, and so they're reluctant because they know that the straight Brahmans will be very demanded in the Indonesian feedlots. And the other thing was, it was very important to find out how the crossbreds performed over in those feedlots, because live export is still our main market. So the Indonesian live export market has been the main destination for young Northern Australian cattle for many years, and we hope that mutually beneficial trade continues for many years to come. And it's important that the customers are happy with the cattle that we're producing. So we wanted to do a study to find out whether this was actually the case, and find out whether the perception that the crossbred cattle don't perform as well over in Indonesian feedlots was true or not. And so we did this study to compare the performance of the crossbreds F1 Senepol steers to the Brahman steers in an Indonesian feedlot. So we were very fortunate to be able to form a collaboration with Elders Indonesia, who agreed to buy the cattle from our research farm and allow us to study their performance over there in their feedlot in Lampung province. And we want to really gratefully acknowledge their cooperation and assistance with this project. So the steers that were used, they were weaned from the Katherine region in the VRD and trucked up to Douglas Daly, where they grazed improved pasture, buffel pasture, as part of a cell grazing trial. They were all in the same mob ever since weaning at Douglas Daly Research Farm. And then In February in 2014, so last year, we got them all in and weighed them and selected those that were above 300 kilos, between 300 and 350, to be sold for this feedlot study. And so what we found there was that 24% of the Brahman steers and 57% of the F1 Senepol steers were heavier than 300 kilos. And again, that just shows how the heavier weaning weights and higher growth rates lead to a higher proportion of these crossbred steers being turned off earlier. So with that selection process, we ended up with 54 F1 Senepol steers and 32 Brahman steers that went through the normal export process through Darwin and ended up over at the feedlot in Lampung and were inducted on the 15th of March. The average weight at induction was 310 kilos. So the steers were just managed as per normal management in the feedlot and fed their normal rations for 121 days. So they did get a starter ration for 3 weeks and then a finishing ration, and you can see there the major ingredients in the ration. So we measured weight and fat depth at the P8 site ultrasonically at induction and again at the end of the feeding period. Now here's some of the results. I realise just a big table of numbers there, but I'm hoping just to be able to highlight some of the more important ones. So you can see there at induction, the average weight of the two genotypes was pretty similar, about 4 kilograms difference. And then during the time in the feedlot, the average daily gain of the F1 Senepol steers was significantly higher than the Brahmans, so 1.71 kilos a day compared to 1.54. And as a result of that, at the final weights, the F1 Senepol steers were 25 kilos heavier. So this is a graph just showing their average weight of each of the two breeds throughout the period that we studied them. And you can see that during the time in the feedlot that the F1 Senepols put on about 22 kilos more weight than the Brahmans. And the other thing was that when we measured the P8 fat depths at the end, that the F1 Senepols were about the same fatness as the Brahmans, even though they were 25 kilos heavier. So that just shows that you can fatten them to heavier weights before they start depositing fat. Again, that's just an indication of the mature size is slightly larger, and so that in the feedlot there's a bit more value adding for them. They can spend more time in there putting on more weight before you start wasting feed on just putting into fat. Now what we found, it was interesting when I compared the performance in the feedlot in Indonesia to the performance in the feedlot in central Queensland with the year before. We found that the average daily gains were quite similar. You can see there on the screen that it appears that the average daily gain in the Queensland feedlot was a bit higher, but that is mostly due to there being more recovery from weight loss in transport in the Australian feedlot. So when they sit on a truck going from Katherine over to central Queensland over several days and through spelling yards, they end up losing quite a bit more weight. And so they lost 9% of their weight by the time from the farm to induction. They lost 9%, whereas the ones that went over to Indonesia on boats only lost 3%. And I should say that there was a bit of a delay that they sat around in the depot in Darwin for a little while before the boat went. And so if you use the weight that we recorded on the research farm before they left as a starting weight, then the rate of gain actually appears higher in the Indonesian feedlot, 1.6 kilos a day as opposed to 1.43. And so I guess it's just bringing out that these very high feedlot average daily gains that you hear of in feedlot, a lot of that is just recovery from weight loss that's occurred in transport prior to them being inducted. And there was less of that in the boat trip to Indonesia. These are just some pictures of the finished animals in the feedlot over there in Lampung. It's a bit of a range of types. There's one of the Brahmans that was involved in the comparison. And so at the end of the feeding period, these animals were sent over to the Elders Abattoir at Bogor and boned out there for the restaurant market. And the boning room yield was 2.4% higher for the F1 Senepols. And so in conclusion, instead of finding that the crossbred steers did worse than Brahmans, this research found that they performed better than Brahmans. They put on more weight in the feedlot, an extra 21 kilos. Obviously, associated with that, they had higher average daily gains, were heavier at slaughter and had heavier carcass weights. Same P8 fat depth at the heavier weight and had higher boning room yields. And I guess the important thing is that the Indonesian feedlotters were very happy with these animals, and therefore cattle buyers should be able to buy this type of animal with confidence that the Indonesian feedlotters, the customers, are going to be very happy with what they get. The other, I guess, advantage is that the better meat tenderness means that they've got the option to also target the restaurant trade as well as the wet market. And so just to sum up there, the F1 Senepols were found to offer production advantages to Indonesian feedlotters as well as Australian cattle producers. And just a word here from Dick Slaney over there in Indonesia, saying that yes, they would pay more for these crossbred steers, and yes, the buyers are very happy with them. So if we just look at some of the benefits here, for North Australian cattle producers, the extra weight at sale at 18 months of age, 33 kilos on average at current prices is about $100. If you were to get a 5-cent premium per kilo, you add on about another $17. So you're looking at about $117 per steer, which is significant. For the Indonesian feedlotters, the extra weight gain in the feedlot, 21 kilos at current prices, you're looking at about 819,000 rupiah. Obviously, there's feed conversion considerations that have to be taken into account, and I don't pretend to be an expert in Indonesian feedlotting. I'm not sure what the higher boning room yields would translate to in dollar terms, or the option to target the restaurant trade. But I guess the important thing is that it's a win-win for both, for Northern Australian cattle producers and for the Indonesian feedlotters. So just a few acknowledgements. Very grateful to MLA Live Export for funding the work that was done in Indonesia, for the Northern Territory Government for funding all the work that was done with the Senepol crossbreeding project here in the Northern Territory. Elders Indonesia again, especially Dick Slaney, Jason Hatchett and the team at Lampung at the feedlot. The support of the Katherine Pastoral Industry Advisory Committee and our staff on research stations. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. We've got time for a quick question if anybody's got a quick question of Tim. Just up the back there. We should get a microphone there for you.
What do you think about the consumption of Brahman?
Okay, for those that didn't hear, the question was about the consumption of the two genotypes. We're not able to comment on that because the animals were in the same pen, with the two genotypes were in the same pen in the feedlot. So we wanted to do that for statistical purposes, so that you couldn't say, oh well, that pen had slightly better conditions to the other pen. So they were in there together. We can't comment on their. As a result of that, we can't comment on feed conversion efficiency. They'd have to go in separate pens and keep track of the feed costs to be able to do that. It's likely, well, we'd just be guessing. I mean, you can't make meat out of nothing, so I'm assuming they eat more, but they just do it in a quicker period of time. So.